Our world is a world of water. The oceans cover 71% of the surface of the Earth and provide us with the oxygen we need for every 2 breaths we take. From space, the seas are a blue and calm void. Yet under the surface, they hold life, mysteries and wonders we could scarcely imagine. Today, much of this life is threatened by the actions of the planet's top predator, man. Pollution, climate change, and intensive overfishing threatens a significant amount of the life in our seas. It also puts at risk the livelihoods of those who work at sea, those who enjoy its spoils, and those that rely heavily on marine life to survive. Individuals and groups who document and study the marine environment may find that many of these wonderful creatures become lost. It may be the case that much of the marine life we see today is lost to history. And as the seas continue to change, we may find that much of the life around us can only ever be seen through a screen.
The ability to supply what's an important and basic foodstuff from somewhere that's so close, it's in everybody's best interest that any profit that comes from the sea is sustainable, that the stocks can survive at a reasonable level and supply a profit and the foodstuff with an acceptable amount of impact on the environment.
Humanity has enjoyed a long and fruitful relationship with the sea for many thousands of years, and for nearly all of human history, there has been enough fish in the sea to feed us all. As technology developed in the 20th century, fishing vessels could catch more fish in more places than ever before. Today, these developments continue, and we have a global fishing industry worth nearly $250 billion per year. In a world where 1 in 7 of us rely directly on fish to survive, increasing global population, squeezes on resources, and increased consumption raises the question, can we continue to exploit the sea without changing it forever? In 1988, the amount of fish caught at sea peaked, and since then, global fisheries catch has stabilised at around 80 million tonnes per year. But because demand for fish did not peak, the majority of stocks today are at or beyond their maximum sustainable yields. Consequently, fishing has played a major role in changing the dynamics and demographics in the sea.
Fishing has transformed the marine environment in a couple of ways. The first, obviously, is the removal of fish. When you start fishing an area, then the big old fish disappear first, and gradually then as fishing intensifies, the species disappear in order of their size. So the biggest, the most vulnerable ones disappear before the resilient ones. And what we have left today is resilient species that can cope with high levels of removals.
The oceans today are very different to how they used to be. While it may appear that the oceans are healthy and that there are plenty of fish in the sea, the reality is that we have overfished marine environments and major changes have occurred. One of the most significant of those changes has been the reduction in the number of large and predatory marine species. Because large marine species are so commercially valuable, they have been continuously targeted by fishers over time. But by fishing too quickly and too vigorously, fishers put pressure on the ability of the marine species to replenish themselves. Even today, where there is large fish, there is overfishing.
The classic example is the bluefin tuna, which everyone talks about, and the part of the reason that the bluefin tuna is so threatened is because I think people don't realise quite how large these animals are. They can, well in excess of 2 metres long, and as a result, that means that in terms from the age that they reach sexual maturity is much later, and overfishing often will end up targeting the smaller individuals, so way before they're able to reproduce.
Not to be confused with the tuna that is sold in cans, the Atlantic bluefin is an endangered species, but also one of the most valuable fish in the world. The overexploitation of bluefin tuna has been a concern for many years, but because the fish is a delicacy in some parts of the world, and an individual tuna may sell for hundreds of thousands of dollars, exploitation is continuing at an unsustainable rate. The enduring popularity of bluefin tuna in the Far East is now threatening stocks that were long held to be healthy. In recent years, it has become more obvious that severe depletion of the Pacific stock has occurred. Scientists from the International Committee of Tuna and Tuna-like Species in the Pacific Ocean reported earlier in 2012 that the spawning biomass of Pacific bluefin tuna has fallen by 96.4% against unfished levels. This sort of overfishing isn't something that is just limited to distant oceans. We've also seen similarly dramatic stock declines closer to home.
Cod in the North Sea, which is probably one of our most iconic species, was fished to an extremely poor state. There was concerns that it would go the same way as cod stocks in the Grand Banks in America, where they completely crashed.
The majority of cod consumed in the UK does not come from British waters. Instead, we rely on imports from Iceland, the Barents Sea and the Baltic to provide the fish for one of the nation's favourite meals. Throughout the 1960s, a healthy stock size and a healthy population saw a fishing frenzy in the North Sea. But when stocks showed signs of decline, the frenzy remained steady. So what went wrong? Firstly, fishing mortality, which is the rate that fish are removed from a stock, increased in percentage as stock sizes fell, from 35% per year in 1960 to 60% per year in 1990. Additionally, fishers were using nets with mesh that was far too small, meaning cod was being caught as young as 1 year old, well before they were able to reach sexual maturity. This meant there was simply never enough young fish to rebuild stocks. When this occurs, it is known as recruitment overfishing.
Unfortunately, due to some foresight from the industry and due to some good management, those stocks are actually starting to increase, and they are coming back, but very, very slowly. They're certainly getting there, but they're certainly not in any state yet that we would consider sustainable. But we hope over the next couple of years, definitely they will be recovering, which is it's a good news story, but following on from something terrible that happened in our seas. And it's certainly something we wouldn't want to see again.
The pattern of depleting large and predatory fish from our oceans is something that has been observed across the world. And when predator numbers are reduced in an area, this can significantly alter food web dynamics. On a global scale, these changes in the food webs that have occurred as a result of overfishing large fish was first described in 1997 by Professor Daniel Pauly.
If an ecosystem is relatively stable for a long time, forms will evolve that are large. Large dinosaurs or large fish will evolve in a system, and they will dominate the system in a sense that they have themselves no predator. And these forms can utilize resources most economically. The large animal eat, for example, per unit body weight, eat less than small animals. So the large animals, however, are more sensitive to exploitation because they need a long time to reach maturity and reproduce. So humans, which will target the large animal first, fisheries target as much as possible the larger animals. And they have been, for example, around the British Isles, the large fish have been exterminated or sharply reduced already 100 years ago. And then we are fishing fishing the medium fish, which become then the biggest available. And because of shifting baselines, we think they are the biggest animals, but the biggest animals are gone. And thereafter, as we target the medium-sized fish, they themselves become depleted and so on. And at the end, we have only very small fish, and because of shifting baseline, we think that it is the ecosystem as it should be, as it was before, but it wasn't. And that is a process I have described as fishing down marine food web, and you can identify it all over the place. And this process has been contested by various colleagues who look only at short time series, or who look at time series that include both coastal fish and offshore fish, and where the process is masked. But it is very, very prevalent all over the world.
One way scientists are able to determine whether or not fishing down marine food webs has occurred has been to record change in the mean trophic level of marine landings over time. The mean trophic level is an indicator based on the position that organisms hold within food webs. If the level is seen to fall, it is suggestive that larger organisms are being depleted, and a greater proportion of smaller organisms are being caught. Pauly and his colleagues argue that this is happening in many of the world's oceans. In European waters, the change in mean trophic level indicates that fishing down the food web has occurred in almost all areas. Although some regions have seen a depletion of fish stocks without an apparent change in mean trophic level since recording began. In the Mediterranean, for example, 95% of fish stocks are overexploited, but there has been little change in the mean trophic level since the 1950s. For scientists to determine how regions like the Mediterranean may have changed prior to monitoring fish catch, they can turn to an unlikely ally.
Historical imagery is obviously something which we can look at to learn from about what the sea was like in the past. And this painting behind me was done by Frans Snijders in Holland in the 17th century, and it depicts a fanciful scene of a fish market, and on that fishmonger slab there are these huge fish, things like right in the center a sturgeon, a large wolffish with its mouth agape, there are cod, there are skates in there, and the thing that it tells us is that there was a wide variety of fish that were being eaten at that time, and non-fish too. There's a porpoise in there as well, and seals. And the other thing it tells us, they were very big. You know, the animals that are being depicted in these sorts of paintings are almost universally large, and it doesn't just come down to artist's license. It's about what was actually available at the time. There are Delft tiles from the 17th century which show people holding huge cod that are chest high and stretch all the way down to the ground. So there was a wide variety of big animals present in the seas around Britain and in Northern Europe. That has changed a great deal today. So there are far fewer species that are big, and there are far fewer things on offer on those fishmonger slabs than there were then.
As well as changing the type of fish being caught at sea, the way fishing is occurring and where fish are being caught has changed significantly over the last few decades. One reason our supermarkets still have no shortage of fish to sell is because fishing effort has increased and fleets have continuously moved into new areas. As fish stocks have fallen in coastal waters and the technology used in fishing has improved, we have seen the industry move further offshore to meet demand. Now, even the deep sea is being fished on an industrial scale.
Well, I think the drivers of deep sea fishing on an industrial scale, increased demand for fisheries products, searching for new opportunities by fishing fleets, and overcapacity and overfishing in coastal waters and open ocean pelagic waters. And the reality is that the fishing is going ever deeper. There are some disturbing trends in the world of deep sea fisheries, which I can see based on the work I've been doing. One of which is a developing fishery here in the Northeast Atlantic for myctophids. lanternfish. But it's targeting a species of which we don't know a lot about, and it's targeting these fish for fish meal and fish oil, so grind up for aquaculture feed or chicken feed. And the catches in the Northeast Atlantic have gone from almost nothing to about 130, 140,000 tons over the course of the last several years. And here we have a fishery, a deepwater pelagic fishery that's potentially now exploiting fish stocks well below the upper 200 meters and potentially going down into 1,000 meters or more.
Often, species in the deep sea take a long time to reach maturity and have relatively few offspring. The intensive industrial fishing required to make deep sea fishing economically viable, in combination with the biology of the species, means stocks are often overfished.
The industrialization of fishing has been phenomenal. Economies of scale have driven ships now that we now have the term super trawler. We never used to have the term super trawler. Most of the people are familiar with the trawler that would leave from their local port. Fairly small thing, fairly easy to envisage that that's not going to do too much harm. Nowadays we've got trawlers the size of ocean liners. Converted tankers are now storing fish, huge amounts of fish. The Margaris in Australia that was banned in Australia is a great example of this.
The Margaris and similar vessels represent the extreme industrial end of fishing. Owned by huge multinational corporations, vessels of this size can catch around 200 tons of fish per day. That's about the same weight as 20 buses. In the Pacific, super trawlers provide an example of the kind of destruction they can leave in their wake, having been blamed for decimating the population of jack mackerel, a species once thought impossible to overfish. Super trawlers move from area to area, catching as much fish as they can. This year, the Margaris has been fishing off the coast of Africa for fish destined for Europe.
Any discerning consumer can make a judgment by area of capture. If something says Mauritania on it, then you want to find, if you're worried about the sustainability, you want to find out who caught it, which country it was actually caught by, and that's the sort of thing I would avoid, because I know the practices that go on in that area, and they are not sustainable. They're detrimental to both the environment, the stocks, and more importantly from me as a fisherman, to the local fishermen and their economy, which is very small scale.
In Europe, the demand for seafood cannot be met only by exploiting European waters. Consequently, super trawlers and other large vessels are fishing in other parts of the world to help meet EU demand. Much of this fishing has been taking place in waters belonging to developing nations, under trade deals known as bilateral trade agreements. For Europe, this means the EU is given access to foreign waters and in exchange promises to aid the development of the host nation. Africa is an attractive destination for EU vessels as the seas are rich and productive and the local fishing industry is too underdeveloped to exploit it. However, these trade agreements do not offer the best deal for Africa. The European Union is underpaying for the fish they are taking, and EU vessels are simply extracting too much, putting the local fishing industry at great risk.
There are quite a number of industrial fisheries for species that are very low down on the food chain. It's not that I find per se the idea of fishing for them wrong, it's the fact the quantities involved, the frequency involved, and because they are generally multi-million pound operations run by companies, they have very, very strong lobbying powers.
Fishing effort across the world is supported with financial subsidies to help ensure fishing can continue when faced with difficulties. Globally, around $26 billion a year is given to the fishing industry. That's more than the UN peacekeeping budget, digital music sales, and the cost of the London Olympics combined. While subsidies are often used well to manage and enforce fisheries conservation efforts, over half of global subsidies are thought to contribute to increased fishing effort, a major component of overfishing. Lobbying by large multi-million-pound corporations means that taxpayers' money is supporting super trawlers and other destructive fishing enterprises. And the reality of it is, without taxpayer subsidisation, these vessels would likely be too expensive to run. In the European Union, it is very difficult to determine exactly how the Fishing Subsidy Fund is being spent, according to Jack Thurston, an investigative journalist and advocate for greater EU transparency. Jack and his team tried to determine just exactly how EU money was being spent, but found that information was very hard to come by.
It's a real step backwards in transparency, and at a time when we desperately need to know how this money is being spent. Are EU funds being used to fish for overexploited fish stocks? Or, perhaps worse, for criminal fishing operations? We just don't know. What is most startling is that neither does the Commission, because we know that they have not themselves asked for this data from national governments.
Super trawlers have been observed in the past breaking fishing regulations. Here we see 3 large vessels involved in the illegal action of transshipping, where catch is swapped between ships to circumvent quota limits. But has EU money gone to fishing companies that continue to break the rules? What Jack's team found was that fishing companies that had been caught breaking rules continued to receive funding from the European Union, evidence that fishing subsidies need reform. It's not only the economics of fishing that need reforming, but the thinking behind how our seas are managed needs to change. Large areas of the ocean remain completely unmanaged or protected, thus increasing the risk from overfishing, or even from fishing taking place illegally. Political action remains a long way behind scientific advice on how to best manage the oceans, despite strong scientific consensus and public support for these management decisions.
There are many different types of management techniques in order to promote fish stocks to recover and seafloor habitats. You can limit the amount of hours fishermen spend at sea. You can control the types of gears that they're using to exploit their fish stocks. But perhaps one of the most increasingly used management tools at the moment, the one that's receiving the most attention, is the establishment of marine protected areas. And these areas are closed to some or all types of fishing gears.
The theory behind marine protected areas is simple. Like nature reserves on land, marine protected areas provide different levels of protection, usually by restricting activities within boundaries to protect habitats and species inside. Decades of research has shown that marine protected areas can have many positive and often rapid effects on marine environments.
You can consider a marine reserve to be a bit like money in the bank, and what you have is a deposit. The cash in your account is equivalent to the amount of fish that are present in the protected area, and they spill out a certain amount of interest each year in the way of offspring and fish that spill over into surrounding fishing grounds. And then the more fish you have in your account, the more that interest will be in a net sense. So it pays to fish less because it'll build up the stocks, which means that you can catch more.
Scientists have expressed that we need to protect between 20 and 30% of all marine habitats across the world to the highest degree, and political targets in 2006 aimed to protect 10% of the world's oceans by 2010. Today, in 2015, less than 3% of the world's oceans have any type of protection, and less than 1% to the highest degree. One contributing factor to why we seem to be missing both scientific and political targets is pressure from the fishing industry, driven by a fear of losing business and a mistrust of the science.
I have not been presented with any outright, undeniable evidence that conservation zones within the waters that are fished by UK fishermen would have a benefit. I can clearly understand that if you leave an area completely untouched by human, then it will change, it will regenerate, but whether or not it will regenerate with the stocks that you are trying to, or the species that you are trying to enhance the life prospects of, there's very little proof.
But is it true that there is little evidence that marine protected areas work in UK waters?
Studies into the effects of marine protected areas are less common in temperate and cold waters, and particularly lacking in the UK. And this has allowed fishermen, fishing organisations and politicians to kind of climb on the bandwagon that marine protected areas have no place within our waters. However, our research shows something very different to that.
Lamlash Bay on the island of Arran in Scotland is home to one of only 3 fully protected no-take zones in the United Kingdom, where no fishing of any kind is permitted within the area. The area was originally designated to protect valuable areas of the seabed from the impact of destructive scallop dredging. Yet the establishment of Lamlash Bay's no-take zone by the Community of Arran Seabed Trust provided Lee Howarth and his team the perfect opportunity to explore the UK's marine protected area potential, and determine whether the protection of commercially valuable species would benefit both the environment and the fishing industry.
So this is the size of scallops we measured in 2013, and these white bars show how many scallops were that size when we caught them. And you can see that the white bars are substantially smaller than these grey bars, which are the size of scallops within the reserve. And we found that scallops were anywhere between 2 to 4 times larger within the reserve than outside. And this is important because older scallops have larger reproductive organs, capable of producing substantially more eggs and larvae. So this is the abundance of juvenile scallops within and outside Lamlash Bay over the course of 4 years. This grey line here shows the abundance of juvenile scallops outside the reserve, and this black line shows the abundance of juvenile scallops within the reserve. We can kind of see that juvenile scallops show these 2-year periodic fluctuations going from high to low abundance every 2 years. However, during years when there are juvenile scallops, we find that their abundance is anywhere between 2 to 5 times greater within the reserve than outside, and this is due to nursery habitats growing within the marine reserve, such as macroalgae and hydroids, all of which encourage the settlement of juvenile scallops from the seawater and becoming attached to the seabed, where they then mature into adulthood and one day can be caught by fishermen.
Researchers working in Lamlash also collaborated with local fishermen to determine exactly how the no-take zone was affecting more mobile species, and how in turn this protection would benefit the immediate local fishing industry. By engaging all stakeholders in the dialogue about marine protected areas, both the opportunities for conservationists and the fishing industry should increase. So what is the story so far in Lamlash?
We also found that within the marine reserve, we catch double the amount of lobster compared to if we fished 10 to 20 kilometres away. And this is evidence of adult lobsters moving from within the marine reserve, where lobster densities are very high, to outside the marine reserve, where densities are much lower. And in science, this is called spillover, and it's a very important effect in marine reserves. Because not only are we getting higher densities of commercially exploited species within the reserve, we're also getting higher densities of species outside the reserve where they can contribute to fisheries landings. And this is their main selling point. This is what fishermen are interested in. They want to know that marine protected areas help improve their catches.
Marine protected areas need to play a vital role in the management of the seas, not only to provide a buffer against the impacts of expanding global fisheries and the resulting change in our seafood consumption, but to protect the marine ecosystems themselves from physical damage.
Bottom trawls in particular, and scallop dredges, things that are towed across the seabed, they strip the seabed of rich communities of invertebrates that exist in undisturbed places, and that changes it from being this kind of rich, architecturally complex habitat into huge open areas of shifting sands and gravels. And that itself has a big impact on what can live there and survive.
Bottom trawling is a common method of fishing whose origins date back over 500 years. It involves a vessel pulling a net across the seafloor to target marine life on the seabed. The net is held open by large doors, instruments that are designed to increase the flow of fish into the net's mouth. While the action of a trawl moving across fragile ecosystems can, in some instances, boost productivity in an area, the majority of the trawl's impacts will be negative, especially if employed in areas where damage can occur easily, such as on coral reefs. In areas where trawling occurs frequently on fragile ground, the damage is immediate and obvious, and observable from the skies. But under the surface, the damage can be even more striking.
There have been studies, numerous studies, that have shown that the impacts, the scarring, for example, on the continental slope, which is the area from between the continental shelf, below 200 meters, from the coast out to about 200 meters depth, down to the deep abyssal plain, but scarring of the continental shelf all along the northeast Atlantic, from Norway all the way down to Spain and further south, as a result of deep sea of trawling down to 1,1500 meters. Similarly, in New Zealand and Australia, there have been, particularly Australia, there have been studies of seamounts that have been trawled. Seamounts are the tops of underwater mountains, often extinct volcanoes. These are fairly rocky surfaces, and what you often find on seamounts is quite dense growths of corals and sponges and other types of species that will attach themselves to the rock and take advantage of the flow of water over the mountains to consume the nutrients that come with that. And these ecosystems, these corals and sponges and other kind of attached species on the bottom form ecosystems and form the structure of ecosystems which support a great deal of biodiversity, some of which may be endemic to individual seamounts or seamount clusters. And studies in Australia have shown that, for example, a couple seamounts off Tasmania, which were subject to a bottom trawl fishery for orange roughy, that virtually all of the coral that was on those seamounts was destroyed. Was reduced to rubble as a result of trawling. In one case, one of the seamounts had been trawled 600 times. In another case, it had been trawled 3,000 times. Because the orange roughy kind of comes and schools up over top of these seamounts. So even without the corals there, the orange roughy will continue to come back. And what these trawlers did was just trawled and trawled and trawled and trawled until they couldn't find any more orange roughy. Probably kept on trawling for a while longer just to see if some might show up again. Before they finally abandoned the area. And by comparison, this study looked at a couple seamounts close by, but that hadn't been trawled, and they found something like 90% coral cover on the seamount. So the destruction can be immense.
As well as the potential of significant physical damage from a trawl, there is also the issue of just what exactly is being caught in a trawler's net.
It's a very effective method of fishing. It can produce huge catches, but there can also be huge amounts of bycatch because you don't know what it is that you're actually catching when you get down there. It's a blind method of fishing, essentially.
Bycatch, that is the incidental catch of non-target species, is a significant and global fisheries issue. Some studies estimate that 4 out of every 10 fish caught worldwide is bycatch. Of the various different ways to catch fish used across the world, bottom trawling for shrimp is the worst offender. In some instances, it's so bad that for every 1 kilogram of shrimp hauled, there is 20 kilograms of bycatch. When fish or other marine animals are caught as bycatch, they are often returned to the sea dead or dying. An incredibly wasteful process. Bycatch isn't just a problem that affects fish. Other animals such as birds, turtles, and dolphins are often caught as bycatch. And that leads us to look at a food product and a logo we're probably quite familiar with. Dolphin-friendly tuna.
There have been a number of consumer-led issues that have really changed fisheries. One of them is dolphin-friendly tuna, which was a real big push by the public, finding it unacceptable that dolphins were having to die to supply them with the tuna that they were getting in their tins. But there's still methods being used, such as fish aggregation devices, which are still hugely impactful on the environment and have huge amounts of bycatch.
While this appears to be an innocuous plank of wood floating in the sea, it has actually been placed here with a purpose. This is a fish aggregation device, a man-made or natural object used by fishermen to attract schools of fish, making them easier to catch. They can be very simple objects, or more complex devices with attached nets or even GPS integration. These devices allow fishermen to use their purse seine nets to catch entire schools of fish. But the nature of an aggregation device means it doesn't just attract the target species. Larger, predatory fish like sharks are attracted to the schools of fish which were attracted to the device. With purse seine netting, a large net can be placed around an entire school of fish, and like a drawstring, it is pulled shut. If a shark or another non-target animal finds itself within the net, it is caught. While compared to other types of fishing, purse seine netting has a relatively low level of bycatch, the use of fish aggregation devices has increased the percentage. For example, in the Indian Ocean alone, the use of FADs may kill nearly 1 million silky sharks a year. So what does all this have to do with dolphin-friendly tuna? Well, the use of fish aggregation devices increased after the dolphin-friendly movement expanded in the US, where tuna was being caught with dolphin bycatch. But in the UK, the tuna species we have always consumed never associates with dolphins. So while skipjack tuna is dolphin-friendly, it was never dolphin-unfriendly to begin with. In fact, since fish aggregation device use has increased, a greater proportion of UK-bound tuna is caught using FAD-associated purse seine nets. So it is likely that the bycatch figures that dolphin-friendly movements were trying to eliminate have actually increased.
So fish consumers knowing to buy tuna that's not caught using fish aggregation devices is another strong step that they can make to make sure that what they're eating is having as little environmental impact as possible.
The good news is that consumer pressure has led to major UK supermarkets and tuna suppliers make commitments to phase out the supplying of FAD caught tuna in the future. It is crucial, however, that consumers remain vigilant and check whether suppliers are sticking to their promises. Tesco, for example, made sure that their own brands of tuna were caught in more sustainable ways, but continued to stock other brands without such green credentials. Thankfully, after widespread outcry from consumers, Tesco promised to rethink their sourcing strategy. So what exactly is this sustainable tuna that many supermarkets are switching to? These fishermen have revived a traditional, centuries-old technique for the globalised age. By using a pole and line, tuna can be fished in an environmentally friendly way. Only the target species is caught, and in relatively low numbers. The pole and line industry in the Maldives has even achieved independent certification of sustainability from the Marine Stewardship Council.
The aim for the MSC at a global level is relatively simple. Sustainable fish for this and future generations. If you can make fishing sustainably more profitable than fishing less sustainably, then you can actually encourage the market to move towards a sustainable basis. And that's the aim of the MSC. As a mission, it's a transformative mission to transform the seafood market globally to a sustainable basis.
The MSC is an independent organisation that certifies and rewards fisheries that are sustainable. Formed after the collapse of cod stocks on the Grand Banks in the early 1990s, the MSC now gives consumers greater confidence that the fish they are buying can be sustainable. While by no means a perfect system, the MSC has improved standards worldwide and simplified choice for consumers.
Choosing sustainable fish as a consumer is frankly a nightmare. The level of complexity in trying to find out if a particular fish is sustainable is enormous. You need a team of PhD scientists behind you for every single species and every single fish you catch. That's what the MSC provides, as well as a certification program that's aimed at changing the way the world catches its fish. It's also an eco-label.
When you're buying fish, looking for the MSC logo is a great first step, but it's not the only thing that you can do. By learning about where your fish is from and how it is caught, you can begin to make good decisions, to protect the species that are vulnerable and to reward the sectors of the industry that are striving for sustainability.
If anything, I think it's our duty to ensure that this issue becomes controversial, that people ask questions, that we encourage people to do their own research, that people are critical. And I think as long as people are critical, then they can make their own decisions. So I would say organizations like ours, but also many other organizations, they give a lot of information about the state of the oceans, what's happening with certain fish species in certain places. So just educate yourself, be informed so you can make informed decisions.
So what about where we buy our fish from? Are some supermarkets doing more than others to source sustainable fish?
I really think that retailers have an important role to play. A lot of retailers make a huge effort to make sure that they are being as sustainable as possible and moving towards the best sustainability. And if they can provide their consumers with information and actually, engaging those consumers directly at the till point, I think that's a huge step for them. And it also highlights which supermarkets and retailers are willing to engage and which ones aren't. We produce a supermarket survey every year. Biannually, which we assess supermarkets based on their sourcing policies, based on what they're selling in store, whether they're selling red listed species, whether they're selling any species that are actually considered endangered. And you'd think it would remain relatively static with some supermarkets remaining quite good, right? But actually there is quite a lot of movement within the top sort of 4 or 5 supermarkets, and there are other supermarkets again that just won't engage. And I think, again, putting your money where your mouth is, if you're wanting to eat sustainably, buy sustainable fish from supermarkets that are willing to make changes and are willing to make sure that our fisheries are there for the future.
As well as considering buying seafood with the MSC logo, using a seafood guide can help you buy fish that is sustainable and avoid fish that is not.
The Marine Conservation Society produces a Good Fish Guide, which is a red, amber, green system, where red fish we would consider fish to avoid, amber fish are fish to think about or eat only occasionally, and green fish are fish that we would consider to be in the most sustainable state. We base our advice based on the best scientific advice that's available at the time. We also accept advice from specialists in those areas, so if particular fishermen have additional information, they can also provide us with that. We also base it on the type of fishing, the impact method that fishing method has on a stock and on the environment as a whole, as well as a number of other things like how well it's managed, how vulnerable the species is. We consider all those things, and we produce a red, amber, green guide which will give you a rundown of a particular species in a particular area, fished in a particular method.
Using a seafood guide is a great thing to do. Not only will you learn more about where your fish is from, but they can help you make informed decisions based on the best information available. But if in some circumstances the seafood guide cannot help you make a decision because of limited labelling on a product, which is often the case in restaurants, do not be afraid to ask questions.
What fish is in that dish? Where was it caught? How was it caught? It's quite specific, but I think it makes probably the eating out experience much more enjoyable if you are able to actually get that extra information. I think everybody gains. The restaurateur, because he shows his customer is knowledgeable, and also the customer, because they actually know what they're eating, which is quite important.
By asking questions about the source of your seafood, you are not only improving your experience, but influencing the retailer, who may then think about their sourcing policies or the way they label their fish. It is easy to think that making these small changes to the way you buy seafood will not change anything, but it can, and it does. Small steps by many people can weather a path that changes the way fish are caught and sold, and achieving this is vital.
I guess the biggest thing about overfishing is that it affects everything on Earth. The ocean is the biggest life support system we have. It feeds most people on this planet. So overfishing is an environmental, animal welfare, but also a social justice issue. We cannot live with a dead ocean, and that's why, this is a major, major global issue.
To not take care of something that is a resource, that is an asset to us, for our environmental benefits, for our social benefits, for our economic benefits, for something that provides so much for so many people, to not take care of that is a travesty, basically.
To me, it's one of the simplest, cleanest, safest regardless of who's catching it by what method, it's still an unadulterated product. So people can have confidence that what they're eating is safe and healthy and not tampered with. So that's why it's important that we retain stocks sometimes within yards of where you're walking on the beach. There's a vast resource that, if carefully managed, can still be there, not just for our children, but in hundreds of years, if as a species we survive other things that we're doing.
The unfortunate truth is, overfishing has changed our oceans dramatically, and climate change and pollution will only change it further. But today you can make a difference by choosing to buy seafood that has been caught sustainably. And by doing so, you're taking your responsibility to preserve the oceans seriously, and we can give stocks a fighting chance to recover and to preserve an important industry well into the future. Our waters may indeed be troubled, but if they are to stay that way, well, that's up to you.